So at long last, we have reached the third and final portion of the Arrancar saga. The Fake Karakura Town arc is by far the longest and most battle-intense segment of this story that we have yet to analyse. It follows the events immediately after Aizen leaves Huecom Window for Karakura Town, and Ichigo begins his battle against Ulquiorra, leading us all the way up until Ichigo utilising the final Getsuga Tensho in order to defeat Aizen. So in this video, I'll speak about the characters of Ulquiorra, Gin, Aizen, and several of the Espada, as well as discussing the key battles that take place involving all of them, and the growth that Ichigo undergoes during this story arc. So let's begin my analysis of the final part of the Arrancar saga. This is my breakdown of the Fake Karakura Town arc. Before the video begins, only 20% of the people who actually watch my content are subscribed to the channel. If you enjoy these videos, then subscribe and stick around for more content just like this. Now let's get back to the topic of the video. The Fake Karakura Town arc takes place between chapters 316 to 423 of the manga, spanning a total of 108 chapters. Now these manga chapters were adapted into 53 canon episodes of the anime, which take place between episodes 215 to 342 of the anime. Now at this point in the series, the Bleach anime had become notorious for taking breaks and going on filler before highly anticipated moments like Ichigo's final battle against Ulquiorra. And incidentally, while adapting these 108 manga chapters, we had two filler arcs within the anime, the first of which was the Zanpakuto Unknown Tales arc, and the second being the Gotei 13 Invading Army arc. This had added a total of 75 episodes of filler between the start and the end of the anime adaptation of the Fake Karakura Town arc. So I'm going to begin the analysis by speaking about Ichigo's final battle against Ulquiorra, talking about how this battle has a lasting impact on the character of Ichigo, and how it affects him all the way up until his final battle against Aizen. During this battle, Ichigo has an involuntary transformation, where he transforms into this vast Olore form, where his inner hollow completely manifests on the outside, and targets anyone or anything that stands in his way. In this form, Ichigo had brutally beaten Ulquiorra, and he had even hurt one of his closest friends, Uryu, which is a complete contradiction to the desires of Ichigo's character. This is somebody who wants to protect and defend his friends and family, but in this instance, his fear of his inner hollow that he had prior to training with the Vizards completely manifests here. He effectively dies, and the instinctual beast that lives within him takes over. This occurs because Ichigo had broken the agreement that he had made with his inner hollow during their last encounter. The king will only remain on top of the horse as long as he continues to prove that he has what it takes to hold on to this position. Despite demonstrating unwavering resolve, Ulquiorra was easily able to defeat Ichigo. After firing a Sero at point blank range through Ichigo's chest, he effectively kills him in this moment, leaving his inner hollow with no choice but to manifest when Orihime pleads for Ichigo to protect her. Now through the character of Ulquiorra, the theme of the heart is expanded upon, as we were previously introduced to it through the bond that Kain and Rukia had shared with each other, and how Kain had explained to Rukia that when an individual dies, their heart continues to live on in the memories that they had shared with their loved ones. But through the character of Ulquiorra, we are introduced to a nihilistic, apathetic individual. He knows nothing about the metaphysical concept of the heart, as he tries to relate it to tangibility. In chapter 317, he questions Orihime whether if the heart can be found by tearing a chest apart or by smashing a skull open. Being a very practical individual, he believes that if it cannot be seen by his own eyes, then it doesn't exist. He continues to learn more about the heart and what it means to have persistence in the face of despair during his battle against Ichigo. Emptiness was the aspect of death that Kubo had attached to the character of Ulquiorra. Aizen had saved Ulquiorra from a lonely existence when he had transformed him by using the Hokyoku. It is difficult for him to relate to Ichigo and company wanting to save Orihime from the loneliness of captivity. Effectively, Ulquiorra was born in isolation, and this involuntary solitude had formed his character into this nihilistic being, an individual who knows nothing about the bonds that form between people or the persistence that manifests through one's resolve. These examples are reliant upon an individual having belief in their heart, something that Ulquiorra knows nothing about, hence why he has difficulty relating to Orihime and Ichigo. His heart is literally empty. Ulquiorra's beliefs in fate and despair cause wasn't to clash with Ichigo. It is actually through these beliefs that we can conclude that Ulquiorra is a nihilist. Ichigo refuses to accept that Ulquiorra is stronger than him, when it is evident that he is. As somebody who sees the world in black and white, he is confused as to why Ichigo constantly rejects fate. Fate has determined Ulquiorra to be stronger, so why is it that Ichigo is facing off against Ulquiorra, believing that he can win by some sort of miracle? As an individual, Ichigo always challenges fate throughout the story, and this is because of his inner resolve that he has. We had seen this during the Soul Society arc, and it is once again demonstrated here during his final battle against Ulquiorra. Ulquiorra intends to teach Ichigo a lesson by instilling despair into his character. We know throughout the Arrancar saga, Ichigo has had difficulty holding on to his resolve, as he has been battling with despair. This despair arises from the fear that his inner hollow is going to take over. Consequently, he won't have control over his powers, and he won't be able to protect his loved ones. The worst case scenario is that he may even endanger his loved ones if his inner hollow manifests and loses control like he had done during his battle against Byakuya. The Vastal Lorde transformation brings new life to Ichigo's fears, and as I stated, these impact him throughout the duration of this story arc. It was thanks to this transformation that Ichigo was able to easily defeat Ulquiorra, but at the same time he had inflicted a fatal wound on Uryu which had almost killed him. When Ichigo returns to normal, he is shocked and surprised to learn that he was responsible for all of the damage inflicted upon the surroundings, and he was responsible for hurting Uryu. After realizing that he had gained the upper hand against Ulquiorra in an unfair manner, he desires to end their battle on equal terms. He separates his own actions from the actions of the Vastal Lorde form. He further emphasizes his humanity by not unfairly cutting down Ulquiorra, who was already at the brink of death. At the end of their battle, Ulquiorra succumbs to his injuries, as his body begins to fade into dust, and in his final moments he tragically learns what it means to have a heart, as he forms a lasting connection with Orihime. He reaches his hand out for her and asks her if she is afraid of him, to which Orihime replies that she isn't. She too extends a hand out for Ulquiorra, but before their hands can touch, the number 4 Espada poetically fades away. We truly appreciate the theme of the heart that Kubo implements into the story after the defeat of Ulquiorra. It adds upon the themes of the Soul Society arc. As Rukia had left a lasting impression upon Ichigo and the others, her heart was shared with them. That's why they had enough fond memories of her and were willing to risk their lives in order to rescue her. Within the Huecomundo arc, this was further added upon through the bond between Rukia and Kaien, and now we have a poetic conclusion of this story theme through the defeat of Ulquiorra, a character who we had assumed was irredeemable, who would never understand what it means to have a heart. His death becomes even more tragic when we see him realize that he had formed his first connection with Orihime, as her outstretched hand had symbolized that he had left a piece of his heart within her. Now, moving on from the battle between Ichigo and Ulquiorra, in chapter 380, Byakuya and Kinpachi arrive to assist Ichigo in his battle against Yami. It is during this moment one of my favorite scenes within the entire story occurs, and it is when Byakuya reminds Ichigo of his duty. Former enemy, now turned ally, perfectly encourages Ichigo here. This exchange makes you appreciate the subtlety of Kubo's writing, as the main antagonist of the last arc encourages our hero, reminding him of what he must do. He states that there is nothing for him to do here within Huecomundo, and that he needs to return to the human world. Well, yes, if he does stay, he'll help Byakuya and Kinpachi to take down Yami, but Byakuya perfectly states that the captains of the Gotei 13 do not require the assistance of Ichigo. It is at this point that he asks Ichigo what is his duty. He tells him that his duty is to protect Karakura Town. This is more than just the small circle of people that Ichigo wants to protect. As his power has increased, so has his responsibility. He loves and cherishes his life within the real world, but Aizen seeks to threaten not only Karakura Town but all of existence with his plans. So it is up to Ichigo to utilize his powers in order to fulfill his duty. But frankly, I love comparing this instance to its mirror parallel that occurs during the first half of the Thousand Year Blood War arc, but we'll talk about that later on. We now turn our attention over to the various battles that take place between the Shinigami and the Arrancars within the titular Fake Karakura Town. So after Aizen arrives within the world of the living, it is revealed that the real Karakura Town is currently within the Soul Society, and right now they are in a fake or replica version of the town. This does not deter Aizen's plans in the slightest, as he decides to defeat the Gotei 13 right here and now, and later on go to the Soul Society in order to create the Oken. At this point, the head captain traps Aizen, Gin and Tosen within a wall of fire called Jogaku Enjo. This will give enough time for the Shinigami to take out the Espada without worrying about any interruptions from Aizen and company. So among the several battles that occur within this portion of the story, the first that I want to talk about is the encounter between Haribel and Hitsugaya. Tia Haribel possesses the ability to manipulate water with her Zanpakuto, battle. When Haribel releases her Zanpakuto, her appearance changes similarly to the other resurrections that we had seen up until this point. She is now able to create water from the gill markings of her Zanpakuto. During this battle, we learn about some incredible abilities that are possessed by both Hitsugaya and Haribel, and it's a fascinating exchange between two highly skilled fighters. Haribel prevents Hitsugaya from creating ice from the surrounding water with her own ability boiling ocean steam, when Hitsugaya reveals to the Espada that his Zanpakuto is the ultimate ice type, and that he can even control the moisture within the clouds. She begins to gaze up into the sky with shock as the clouds begin to quickly darken. Before encasing her in ice, he apologizes to her that he had stopped her from avenging her underlings, who had been defeated moments ago by Head Captain Yamamoto. Haribel ends up being broken out of this ice encasing upon the arrival of Wonderwise, whose high-pitched screaming had broken the ice that had encased her. At this point, she takes part in a 3-against-1 battle, as she simultaneously fights not only Hitsugaya, but the Vizards Lisa and Hiyori. Haribel does end up leaving the battle after Aizen becomes impatient and cuts her down. The next significant battle that involves an Espada is that of Barrigan vs Siphon, and again, like all of the other battles against the Espada, it's one of my favourites within the Fake Karakura Town arc. There were several moments during this battle where I was convinced that Siphon was going to lose, and that Barrigan had bested her. The stakes were incredibly high, especially with Barrigan's abilities, but after the Vizards arrive, Siphon is assisted by Hachi, and the two of them are successfully able to take out Barrigan. But before he is defeated, he reveals the resentment that he has towards Aizen by launching his Zanpakuto towards him. We understand more about Barrigan through his backstory, where we learn that he was forced to relinquish his title as the King of Hueco Mundo when Aizen and the others had left the Soul Society. Not only was Barrigan second to Aizen, he had also humiliatingly placed him as the second-ranking Espada under Quixote Starrk, further fanning the flames of resentment that Barrigan felt towards Aizen. This story arc really made you sympathize with the villains and begin to understand the plights of the Espada. We had spoken about Ulquiorra's aspect of death, which was emptiness, and Haribel's aspect of death, which was sacrifice. When it comes to Barrigan, Kubo had given the term senescence as his aspect of death, which means old age or the deterioration of living matter, which perfectly complements his abilities, as well as his physical appearance, especially within his resurrection form. Despite Barrigan possessing a power that represents the absolute truth that every soul will experience death, ironically, Barrigan was nothing more than a fearful creature who too had an immense fear of death. He had done everything in his power to drive away his old age, but in an ironic turn of events, it was his own ability of decaying biological matter that had taken his life. There are a few ironies that exist within the character of Barrigan. He had referred to himself as a king, but he had been dethroned from his position by Aizen. He had the ability to drain away life from biological matter, while at the same time he too was withered and frail. Out of all of the individuals that we see him encounter, Barrigan was the closest to death, and in actual fact, the one who is the most afraid of it. This excellent character writing, which is all too often overlooked, does not just stop here. Kubo, with the same amount of detail, expands upon the aspect of death of Quixote Starrk. During his battle against Shunsui and Ukitake, we learn about the tragic, lonely past of the #1 Espada. Shunsui and Starrk are very similar characters, not only in appearance, but in their personality also. When their battle gets serious, Starrk activates his resurrection in an attempt to goad Shunsui into activating his own Bankai, but unfortunately Ukitake ends up talking Shunsui out of it, stating that he shouldn't utilize it in an area where everybody can see it. From these remarks, we can logically deduce that Shunsui's Bankai must affect the surrounding environment. During this fight, Shunsui utilizes a lot of underhanded tactics, like attacking Starrk from behind, or when he is in the middle of a conversation. After he is defeated by Shunsui, we get a flashback where we learn more about Stark's past. He says to himself that he is alone. We learn that Starrk had begun to envy the weak. Prior to meeting Aizen, Starrk was so powerful that his spiritual pressure had diminished the souls of his comrades. He had nobody around him. He had envied the weak, and in his current position, he stands on top as the best with nobody beside him. Because of his loneliness, he had divided his soul into two parts. We learn that this was the birth of his partner Lilynette. He remarks to himself that the weak are able to gather into large packs in order to become stronger as a group. Starrk wanted to be weak so that he could make friends with individuals who are just as strong as he is. Starrk had joined Aizen after being approached by him. He was impressed that Aizen was able to stay around Starrk without being killed. He ended up accepting Aizen's outstretched hand and had temporarily alleviated himself from loneliness. And in his dying moments, he realizes that he wasn't alone. After Aizen had taken him in, he had become a part of a group, and that group we have come to know as the Espada. One of the key battles that occurs during the Fake Karakura Karakura Town arc is the fight between Komamura and Tosen. Of course, Tosen was among the defectors of the Soul Society, and he was also a close friend of Komamura, so his betrayal was unexpected and had caught Komamura off guard, as he assumes that Tosen's actions are contradictory to his moral beliefs, and to the way that he had portrayed himself to his friend. You can see the disappointment that he has in Tosen when he tells him that he had never thought he would be protecting somebody from Tosen's Zanpakuto. He was clearly under the impression that they would be lifelong allies. His disappointment in his former comrade is amplified when Tosen reveals that he has been given a power that is beyond Bankai. Aizen had gifted him with this incredible power. Komamura shockingly realizes what Tosen has done. The former captain of the 9th Division reveals that he has become hollowified. In the eyes of Komamura, he has forsaken all of his humanity in the pursuit of more power. In every sense of the word, Tosen has given up on his prior life. Komamura had a firm belief in his friend, and he hadn't expected these actions from Tosen. But Tosen had known all too well that one day he would be crossing blades with Komamura. Tosen immediately cuts down his former lieutenant Shuhei Hisagi. When Komamura retaliates, his attack is blocked by Tosen, and it is at this moment that he realizes just how powerful Tosen has become now that he has been hollowified. The issue that characters like Komamura and Hisagi have with Tosen is that he had strayed away from the righteous path. His warped ideals and beliefs about justice have led him to such lows that he has forsaken his humanity, discarded all of his bonds with his loved ones. And if you ask Komamura, Tosen has defiled the memory of his late friend that he had sworn to fight in the name of justice for. Komamura tells Tosen that he is depraved for betraying all of his friends and his allies, and even his subordinates, for turning his back on the Soul Society in an attempt to gain more power. When Tosen proves through his actions that he is irredeemable, Komamura activates his Bankai as their battle begins. We are aware that Tosen's late friend had been killed by the Shinigami of the Soul Society, and Komamura had misunderstood Tosen's beliefs about justice. He had thought that Tosen would have joined the Gotei 13 in order to carry on the ideals of his late friend, as she was an adamant believer of carrying out justice. But Tosen corrects Komamura and tells him that it is not justice to forgive those who had killed his friend, citing the actions of the Gotei 13 as unforgivable and as a motive for him to go against the Gotei 13. Tosen had always had a goal of revenge against the Gotei 13, but the friendships and bonds that he had formed within it, he describes them as vices, as things that were holding him back and distracting him from his goal. Despite everything that Tosen has done, Komamura states that his heart has already forgiven him, and that for now he is acting on behalf of the head captain, and he will take down Tosen for the sake of the Gotei 13. When Tosen activates his resurrection, he transforms into this moth-like creature, and he is finally able to see as he gazes upon Komamura for the first time, telling him that he is more hideous than he had imagined. The irony that Kubo employs in this moment is genius. Tosen has no idea of his own appearance, while he comfortably mocks the appearance of Komamura. We learn that Komamura had formed a friendship with Tosen, as he had realized that Tosen had no longer loved the world. Through their friendship, he had hoped to change his mind. When Tosen easily defeats the Bankai of Komamura and he is about to deliver the final blow, he is striked through the back of his head by his former lieutenant. After Tosen is defeated, Komamura has one request of him. He tells him not to sacrifice himself for the sake of revenge, because Komamura doesn't want to lose him the same way that Tosen had lost his friend. When it appears that Tosen has wavered in his beliefs and ideals of justice, Aizen strikes him as he fulfills the agreement that the two of them had made. In the end, Tosen was the most loyal subject to Aizen. He had understood and supported Aizen's goals even more so than Gin Ichimaru, and he had even told Aizen that if at any moment his resolve wavers, then it is Aizen who should cut him down. And this is exactly what happens here. When Tosen wavers after Komamura's words, Aizen ends the life of his most loyal subordinate. Now the next significant counter is of course between Shinji and Eisen, as the former captain-lieutenant duo reunite for the first time in over 100 years. Their exchange begins by Shinji confirming his belief and trust that he has in Ichigo. He doesn't expect Eisen to know, since he is somebody who doesn't trust his underlings, and even goes out of his way to cut them down, like he had just done to Haribel. Eisen reveals his motive to Shinji, stating that his desire is to become a god that is superior to the Soul King. They have a fascinating, detailed discussion about trust. These two characters who share a history of not trusting one another. They speak about their own interpretations of trust and having faith in others, and understandably Aizen's beliefs are very twisted, and we quickly understand that his beliefs are the core justification for his actions. Very quickly their exchange escalates, as we learn that Shinji also has the ability to control an individual's senses, similar to Aizen's Kyoka Suigetsu. Upon activating the Shikai of his Zanpakuto, Shinji reveals that he has the ability to invert the senses of his opponent. After successfully landing an attack on Aizen, he realizes that Shinji's ability is no more than an optical illusion. Before their battle can continue further, Ichigo finally arrives on the battlefield. He had intended to take out Aizen with one final decisive attack, but it proves to be unsuccessful, and it is at this point that the members of the Gotei 13 and the Vizards appear before Ichigo and protect him from Aizen, as he had been taunting Ichigo and questioning his resolve. At this point, Ichigo is still shaken up by his Vastolore transformation, and incidentally, he is susceptible to Aizen's smooth talking. The Gotei 13 and the Vizards work together and face off against Aizen, as they all have a duty to save the world from Aizen's plans. There is no need for Ichigo to burden himself by shouldering the responsibility of defeating Aizen on his own. He has allies and he needs to rely upon them. When Aizen cuts down Hitsugaya, Soifon, Shunsui and Shinji, the head captain joins the battle. It is at this point that Aizen reveals his trump card, which of course was the Arrancar Wonderwise. With Wonderwise in his resurrection form, Aizen reveals that Wonderwise exists for the sole purpose of extinguishing the flames of Ryujin Jaka, Yamamoto Zanpakuto, with all of the flames of Yamamoto Zanpakuto sealed within Wonderwise. When the Arrancar finally self-destructs, the head captain takes the full force of the explosion in order to protect his underlings. It is at this moment that Aizen is caught off guard and cut by Ichigo while he is donning his hollow mask. After attacking him with a Getsuga Tensho, Aizen reveals that he has the Hokyoku implanted within his body and that he can heal himself. Now during this second exchange between Ichigo and Aizen, he tells the substitute Shinigami that he has known about him since the day that he was born, and he is aware of all of the battles that he has taken part in up until this point. This is because he was responsible for all of them. Adding to this, he tells Ichigo that he was born special, as he was born as a human but it is at this point that Aizen is interrupted by the appearance of Isshin. Isshin expects Ichigo to have a lot of questions for him, especially after seeing him in his Shinigami attire for the first time, but Ichigo maturely understands that there must have been a reason as to why Isshin hadn't told Ichigo that he was a Shinigami, and it is for this reason that he isn't going to press his father for answers. He will wait for the right time where his father will reveal to him the truth in the future. Personally, I love this because it's a throwback to those episodes where Ichigo fought against the Grand Fisher. More specifically, it was Rukia understanding that Ichigo did not want to reveal the circumstances behind the death of his mother, and that she will be patient until Ichigo feels it's the right time to tell her what had happened to his mother. After Aizen defeats Isshin, Urahara and Yoruichi, he heads to the Soul Society with Gin, and this is where we'll turn our attention over to the character of Gin, going over the significant role that he plays within the story, as we finally learn the truth behind the mystery of his character, and how his entire story arc was building up until this point, where he reveals that he has been conspiring against Aizen out of vengeance for Aizen's Hokyoku experimentation, which had permanently affected the life of the one that Gin had fallen in love with, Rangiku Matsumoto. Gin's desire was to no longer see any tears on the face of Rangiku. He had wanted to get revenge for what Aizen had done to her when he had stolen an irreplaceable part of her soul, and so began his century-long plan, where he had stayed close to Aizen, gaining his trust, understanding the weakness of his Zanpakuto, so that he could decisively strike at the perfect moment when Aizen's guard is lowered in order to take him out. When Gin reminds Aizen of his true nature, that he is very similar to a snake, he catches him off guard and pierces him through his chest. We learn that the only way to escape the power of Kyoka Suigetsu is to touch its blade when it is in its unreleased state. Gin had patiently waited decades in order to learn this weakness of Aizen's Zanpakuto, a blade that had assisted Aizen in effortlessly taking out the majority of the Gotei 13 and the Vizards. As smug as ever, even after being stabbed, Aizen states that he was expecting Gin to betray him. He was just curious as to how he would do so, and what I love here is how Gin follows up his betrayal by revealing the true ability of his own Zanpakuto, as he states that he had left a fragment of his blade within Aizen's body. This fragment has the ability to disintegrate cells, and Gin was careful to place this part of his blade within Aizen's heart. He believes that he has successfully taken down his former leader, especially after activating his Bankai and using his ability Kill Kamishini no Yari, which means God-killing spear, a fitting name to end the life of an individual who had attempted to become a god. Gin takes the Hokyoku from Aizen's body and flees. However, Aizen survives the attack shockingly. The Hokyoku ends up returning to Aizen after he reveals that it belongs to him. He has become a part of the Hokyoku whether if it is with him or not. After approaching Gin, he cuts him down in chapter 415, and the Hokyoku of course returns into the center of Aizen's chest. It is at this point in chapter 416 that Dangai Ichigo appears before Aizen. Gin is able to to happily hand over the battle to Ichigo after he sees that the look of his eyes has considerably changed since they had fought moments ago in Fake Karakura Town. During their battle, Gin had concluded that Ichigo is weak. He had sensed a lack of resolve emanating from him, and he even questions whether if Ichigo was this weak this entire time, also commenting upon how fragile Ichigo's holification is, as his mask breaks very easily. We are aware that this is because Ichigo is doubting his own abilities and he is afraid of utilizing his holo powers here. He doesn't trust himself, which leads to him outwardly manifesting this weakness that Gin is so perceptive of. He questions whether if Ichigo really thinks that he is stronger than Isshin, Urahara and Yoraichi, further going on to question whether if he can really beat Aizen in this fragmented state, where he has such a nervous look in his eye. Now it is this exchange and this comment about Ichigo's eyes that we are going to use to contrast against Gin's final look at Ichigo right before he dies, when he gazes upon Dangai Ichigo and sees the confident expression in those eyes, and feels comfortable enough to hand over the battle to him, reassured that Ichigo now has the strength to take out Aizen. The final battle of the Fake Karakura Town arc is of course between Ichigo and Aizen. It is a satisfactory, tense encounter, as Ichigo successfully completes 3 months of training within the Dangai. He appears with a very stoic expression on his face, and it makes you assume that he had known from the very beginning of their fight that he would have to relinquish his powers in order to defeat Aizen. The only way to take out the enemy was to utilize the final Getsuga Tensho, to channel every ounce of his spiritual pressure into his blade and to fire it towards Aizen, in an ability that is referred to as Mugetsu, where Ichigo becomes the Getsuga itself. Aizen has his own image of how the world should be ruled. He disagrees with the current system and wants to overthrow the Soul King. His very existence and the plans that he aims to accomplish threaten the world that Ichigo cherishes so much. During this moment of the story, Ichigo has overcome his fear of his inner hollow, meaning that he now knows how to fight instinctively, and he perfectly combines this with his sense of resolve, which was his ultimate guiding force during the Soul Society arc. With both of these aspects now combined within his character, he is strong enough to face off against the big bad. During this final encounter, both Aizen and Ichigo have become transcended beings. They are both practically gods in their own right. Aizen had attained transcendence through the help of the Hokyoku, an artificial means, whereas Ichigo had looked inward and had attained transcendence through sacrifice, a stark contrast to Aizen, who had relied upon an external power, which was the Hokyoku. The climactic battle of the Fake Karakura Town arc is a battle of ideologies. Ichigo, similar to Urahara, desires to maintain the status quo, while Aizen is opposed to the status quo and wants to change the world. At the end of their battle, after Ichigo defeats Aizen, he feels remorse for his opponent. After exchanging blows with him, he realizes that he had sensed loneliness emanating from Aizen's Zanpakuto. Aizen had felt loneliness because he had nobody to share this ideology with, and the only individual who he could have formed an understanding with, which of course was Urahara. He had adopted an opposite ideology to Aizen, believing that maintaining and protecting the current status quo is the better option. It is because of this momentary loneliness that Aizen had felt, which consequently resulted in the Hokyoku rejecting Aizen, revealing that his true intention was for somebody to see things the way that he did. He didn't want to be alone in his perception of reality, and like I just mentioned, Urahara was the only person who could have remedied Aizen's loneliness. But after learning about the nature of reality, he had followed the path of acceptance of the status quo, while Aizen had wanted to change it. This leads to Aizen's outburst against Urahara, as he proclaims that he despises him. With a mind as brilliant as his, why does he accept the Soul King and the current status quo? Urahara states that the Soul King prevents the Soul Society from becoming divided. Its existence maintains the world. Urahara accepts the way that the world is, but Aizen questions his logic as he declares him to be a loser. He proclaims that a winner doesn't accept the way that the world is, but rather a winner asks how it should be. Aizen is eventually sealed, and 10 days later he is sentenced by the Central 46, and he is given a sentence of imprisonment of 20,000 years within the lowest level of the underground prison of the Soul Society. And the Fake Karakura Town arc sadly ends with Ichigo losing his Shinigami powers, and consequently losing his ability to see spiritual beings like Rukia, as she fades away from his sight as they say goodbye to each other, thus ending the longest story arc of Bleach, the Arrancar saga. It is an understatement to say that a lot takes place within the Arrancar saga. I feel like I have been able to analyze most of the key moments within each of the arcs, but if you want more of an in-depth analysis as to some of the key motives of the characters, then I definitely recommend that you check out my Urahara character analysis and especially my Aizen character analysis. I'm really proud of both of these videos and cannot recommend them enough to fans of Bleach, so definitely check them out if you want a better understanding of the entire Arrancar saga. Now, from the point of after the story that we're at now, Ichigo has lost his powers. This means that we are going to reboot the story in some way. We are going to be returning to the beginnings of Bleach, and we are going back to Karakura Town as Ichigo learns to once again deal with powerlessness. 17 months after the defeat of Aizen begins the Fullbring arc, a very controversial story arc even among casual fans and long-term fans of the story. I've read so many takes about the Fullbring arc, with some people stating that it is a filler arc and it has no meaning or consequence whether if you watch it or not. And I've even read some comments online of people stating that they're going to watch the anime adaptation of the final arc without having experienced the Fullbring arc. The logic behind these takes is that people stopped watching Bleach after Aizen was defeated, believing that that was all that the story was building up to, but there were story beats that were planted by Kubo within the duration of the story that need to be explained. We learn about the nature of Orihime and Chad's powers within the Fullbring arc, as well as explaining how Ichigo combines his hollow powers with his Shinigami powers when he regains all of his abilities at the end of the Fullbring arc. So I'm really looking forward to talking about one of the most controversial story arcs within Bleach, and a story arc that I can personally say is one of my favourites within Bleach, and one that I can say I really enjoyed from the minute that I'd seen it within the anime. So until my next arc analysis video, what did you think about the Fake Karakura Town arc and the ending of the Arrancar saga? I can't wait to read all of your comments, and once again, thank you for making it to the end of the video, and I can't wait to see you in my next Bleach video. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more like it, then please consider supporting my channel on Patreon. I have multiple tiers with rewards including access to an exclusive Discord server, video scripts, as well as being the first to know about unreleased upcoming videos. Thank you for your time, and whatever you choose to contribute I will appreciate, and it will mean a lot to me.